The operations officer of a Waffen-SS flak unit sat in a ditch somewhere in Normandy, scribbling in his diary by the glow of burning vehicles. All around him, ammunition was exploding. Fuel trucks were turning into pillars of fire. And every few minutes, another wave of American shells came screaming out of nowhere, landing with a precision that no German officer had ever seen before. He wrote, "The entire valley we are in seems to be on fire. Thick columns of smoke rise from the shot-up vehicles. Amongst them, ammunition shoots upward. And before it is pitch black, they also fire at us with artillery. Everywhere there are blazing vehicles, exploding ammunition, burning fuel and supply trucks. Everyone streams to the rear." That was not the account of a broken conscript. That was a Waffen-SS officer, one of the most ideologically hardened, physically conditioned soldiers Germany had ever produced, writing in disbelief after encountering American firepower for the first time. If this story grips you, and you want to hear the kind of history they never taught in school, take a moment now to subscribe and hit that bell. We bring you stories like this every week, real accounts from the men who lived them. What those SS officers experienced in Normandy in the 1940-44 was not just war. It was a reckoning. They had trained for years. They believed they were the finest soldiers in the world. Many of them had fought on the Eastern Front and survived. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared them for the devastating industrialized precision of American artillery. To understand why, we have to go back, not to the beaches of Normandy, but to a dusty army post in Oklahoma. Fort Sill, Oklahoma, the 1930s. While Europe was arming itself for another great conflict, a small group of American officers at the U.S. Army Field Artillery School was quietly revolutionizing the art of war. Men like Captain Carlos Brewer, Major Orlando Ward, and Lieutenant Colonel H.L.C. Jones were working on something that would give American artillery a decisive advantage over every other army on Earth. They developed the Fire Direction Center, the FDC. Before the FDC, every artillery battery essentially aimed and fired on its own. Coordination between batteries was slow, clumsy, and often inaccurate. The Americans changed all of that. They created a centralized system where a single command post could gather targeting data from forward observers, compute the firing solutions, and direct multiple batteries to concentrate their fire on a single point, all within minutes. No other army in the world had anything like it. Then came another breakthrough. A lieutenant colonel named Harry Burns, who had been just weeks away from leaving the army entirely, was assigned to a fire direction team at Fort Sill in late 1940. Frustrated by the slow, tedious mathematics required to calculate firing data, Burns one night experimented with a homemade paper slide rule. Another officer, Major George Keyser, recognized its potential. Together, they refined what became known as the graphical firing table, a device that allowed American artillerymen to compute accurate firing data in seconds instead of minutes. Pre-computed for hundreds of variables, wind, temperature, barrel wear, elevation, these calibrated tools turned every American artillery crew into a precision instrument. But the Americans were not finished innovating. They developed a technique that would become the single most feared weapon in their ground arsenal: time on target, TOT. The concept was deceptively simple, but fiendishly difficult to execute. Instead of all the guns firing at the same moment, each battery would fire at a calculated time so that every shell, from batteries spread across miles of countryside, would arrive at the target at the exact same instant. No warning shot. No time to take cover. Just a sudden, simultaneous eruption of steel and fire that obliterated everything in the impact zone. The military standard was plus or minus 3 seconds from the prescribed time of impact. Testing later showed that at the moment of impact, 58% of soldiers in a defensive position are still standing. Within 2 seconds, most are prone. After 8 seconds, all are in cover. The genius of time on target was that it compressed all the killing power of a prolonged barrage into those first lethal seconds, before anyone could react. The first true time on target mission in combat was conducted under General J. Lawton Collins with the 25th Infantry Division on Guadalcanal. By the time the Americans reached Normandy, they had perfected it. During the assault on Cherbourg and the breakout in Operation Cobra, The 7th Corps artillery massed 258 guns and coordinated their fire to deliver 140,000 rounds in concentrated strikes that neutralized German strongpoints with virtually no warning. A forum account from a veteran artilleryman described the aftermath of one such mission in France. A German battalion was found. The troops had been in formation when the shells landed, and they were still in formation where they fell. They had died standing up. They never heard it coming. Now, imagine you are an SS officer arriving in Normandy in June 1944. You have trained harder than any soldier in the German military. The physical regimen of the Waffen-SS resembled commando training. You could cover 3 kilometers in full field dress in 20 minutes, something unheard of in the regular army. You and your men had been shaped by an ideology that told you nothing could break you. Your officers had an average life expectancy of 3 months at the front, and they accepted it. The 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division, Götz von Berlichingen, was one such unit. Named after a medieval German knight with an iron fist, the division was formed in France in late 1943 from a mixture of German conscripts, Romanian Volksdeutsche, and even Italian volunteers. They were short on transport, short on heavy armor, but long on fanaticism. Their commander, SS Gruppenführer Werner Ostendorf, was a veteran officer who believed in the offensive above all else. The division received its orders to move to Normandy on June 7th, the day after D-Day. But Allied fighter bombers ruled the skies. It took the 17th SS nearly a week just to reach the battlefield. Some battalions arrived on bicycles. Entire units would not show up until late June or even mid-July. When they finally reached the area around Carentan, a critical crossroads town that linked the Utah and Omaha beachheads, they found the American paratroopers of the 101st Airborne already dug in. On June 13th, the Panzergrenadiers of SS Panzergrenadier Regiment 37, supported by Stug 3 assault guns, launched a counterattack to retake Carentan. At 700 hours, they pushed forward, and for a brief moment, the assault guns got within 500 yards of the town. Then the Americans answered. Artillery from the 101st Airborne's own batteries, the 65th and 377th Parachute Field Artillery Battalions, and, critically, the guns and tanks of Combat Command A of the 2nd Armored Division, opened up on the SS positions. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The SS forces, surprised by the intensity of the firepower, quickly came to a standstill and were caught in the enemy's fire. As one German officer, Oberleutnant Martin Pöppel, later wrote in his memoirs, the SS had approached the battle with a murderous idealism, but without proper reconnaissance and without sufficient artillery support of their own, spirit alone was not enough to win the city back from the Americans. The paratroopers of the 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, who had been fighting the Americans for days, watched the SS debacle with what one account described as a certain schadenfreude, a grim satisfaction, at the fact that the Waffen-SS, with all their pomposity, had failed miserably in Carentan. By the 15th of June, just 2 days of fighting, the 17th SS had suffered 456 casualties. Ostendorf himself was wounded on June 16th and had to be evacuated. The division would never recover its strength. But Carentan was only the beginning of the nightmare. Across the Normandy front, every SS division that engaged American forces learned the same brutal lesson. The 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend, the elite formation composed of teenage Hitler Youth volunteers led by Eastern Front veterans, was thrown against Canadian and British forces around Scene. They fought with extraordinary tenacity, but Allied artillery and anti-tank guns systematically dismantled their offensive capability. As one historian concluded, artillery and anti-tank guns were the key to victory, and the Allies possessed large numbers of these effective weapons. All of the German assaults were checked and defeated in detail. By August 22, 1944, Army Group B reported that the 12th SS Panzer Division consisted of just 10 tanks, 300 men, and no artillery whatsoever. It had entered Normandy with over 20,000 men and 150 tanks. It had been, for all practical purposes, destroyed. During prisoner interrogations, German POWs in France, including SS men, frequently remarked on the heavy volume of American fire they had experienced. The correspondent Ernie Pyle, who walked among the fighting men, wrote simply, "Our artillery, the Germans feared it almost more than anything we had." In the fighting for Hill 192 outside of St. Lo, a single American infantry division fired up to 20 time-on-target missions per night to keep the defenders off balance. 20 per night. The Germans never knew when the sky would split open. Then came the final innovation, the one that would shatter whatever confidence the Germans had left. The proximity fuse. For most of the war, the Americans possessed a weapon so secret that it was classified at a level second only to the Manhattan Project. The variable time fuse, or VT fuse, was a tiny radar set built inside an artillery shell. It did not need to hit the ground to explode. Instead, it sensed the proximity of the Earth and detonated the shell 20 to 50 feet in the air, showering everything below with a lethal rain of shrapnel. The Pentagon had refused to allow its use on the European mainland, terrified that the Germans might capture an unexploded shell and reverse engineer the technology. But when Germany launched the Battle of the Bulge on December 16, 1944, Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower demanded permission to use them. Within 2 days, the restriction was lifted. Colonel George Axelson, commanding the 406th Artillery Group, did not even wait for official authorization. When the 38th Cavalry Squadron came under heavy German attack near Monschau, Axelson ordered his gunners to load the new shells immediately. The effect was devastating. German divisions that had felt safe in bad weather, knowing that poor visibility would prevent accurate observation of timed fire, suddenly found themselves being annihilated by shells that exploded above their heads without warning. Reports emerged of German soldiers refusing orders to leave their bunkers during artillery attacks. The psychological effect was as devastating as the physical destruction. General George S. Patton himself wrote to the Chief of Army Ordnance about what he witnessed. "The new shell with the funny fuse is devastating. We caught a German battalion which was trying to get across the Sauer River with a battalion concentration and killed by actual count 702. 702 men from a single concentrated fire mission." Patton concluded, "I think that when all armies get this shell, we will have to devise some new method of warfare." In total, 200,000 proximity-fused shells were used during the Battle of the Bulge. They made the already superior American artillery almost incomprehensibly lethal. The story of what SS officers wrote after their first encounter with American artillery is not simply a story about weapons. It is a story about two fundamentally different approaches to war. The Germans invested in ideology, willpower, and the mystique of the warrior. They built an army on the principle that the superior man would always prevail. The Americans invested in systems, technology, and coordination. They built an army on the principle that firepower, properly directed, would save the lives of their soldiers and break the will of the enemy. When those two philosophies met on the fields of Normandy, in the hedgerows of the Bocage, and in the frozen forests of the Ardennes, the outcome was written in the after-action reports, the war diaries, and the private letters of the men who lived through it. General Eisenhower later wrote, "The speed, accuracy, and devastating power of American artillery won confidence and admiration from the troops it supported and inspired fear and respect in their enemy." The men at Fort Sill who invented the Fire Direction Center. The lieutenant colonel who carved a slide rule from paper one frustrated night. The mathematicians who figured out how to make shells from different batteries arrive at the same point at the same instant. The scientists who built a radar set small enough to fit inside an artillery shell and tough enough to survive being fired from a cannon at 20,000 Gs. Those men never charged a machine gun nest. They never stormed a beach under fire. But what they built, the system, the science, the art of coordinated destruction, may have saved more American lives and won more battles than any single act of individual heroism in the entire war. And the Waffen-SS, the men who believed they were invincible, learned the truth in the worst possible way. Not from a bullet, but from the sky splitting open above them, without warning, without mercy, and without a single American soldier in sight. The next time you hear someone say that wars are won by courage alone, remember the operations officer of the 17th SS crouched in that ditch in Normandy, watching his world burn. He had all the courage in the world. It was not enough. If this story moved you, please subscribe to the channel, hit the thumbs up, and ring that notification bell so you never miss a video. Share this with someone who needs to hear the real stories of the war, the ones that changed everything. We'll see you in the next one.